Wipe that daft smile off your face.
Have you looked in the mirror lately? What the heck have you got on your head?
Pardon?
You've got a wig on.
It's hairpiece, isn't it?
What do you want to wear a wig for?
Well, it smartens you up, doesn't it? You know, your general appearance.
It's like wearing somebody else's false teeth.
This is the story of why Albert Tatlock never returned to Coronation Street, and the truth might actually surprise you. Decades of mystery and speculation about why one of the show's most beloved characters vanished from our screens in January of '84 all miss the real story. And what actually happened is nothing like what viewers assumed.
Fred, if it's not a rude question, how much did it cost?
You got it on National Health.
Did I get it on?
Jack Howarth, the man behind Albert Tatlock, never chose to leave Coronation Street. Nobody sacked him, the writers didn't force him out, and retirement was the furthest thing from his mind. His wife, Betty, spoke to the press just weeks before his death and made the situation crystal clear, telling them Jack had no intention of resigning and would stay in Coronation Street for as long as Granada wanted him there. The 88-year-old actor was scheduled to return to filming at the end of April '84 when everything changed. Kidney failure and pneumonia took him on the 31st of March, 1984, at Llandudno General Hospital, and he never made it back to the cobbles he'd called home for nearly a quarter of a century. Understanding why Albert Tatlock's absence carved such a massive hole in Coronation Street means appreciating exactly who Jack Howarth was.
Shut up, you daft crate egg, and sup your beer.
Right, hey, will you have a nip?
Hey?
In your stout?
Now you're talking.
A staggering 76-year career stretched behind him. A run so extraordinarily long that the Guinness Book of Records recognized him as the most durable performer. 76 years of working in entertainment is longer than most people live, never mind stay employed. Rochdale, Lancashire, gave birth to John Aubrey Conway Howarth on the 19th of February, 1896, at 96 Mitchell Street, and Queen Victoria still sat on the throne, and the modern world as we know it simply didn't exist yet. That young lad from Rochdale would witness the entire evolution of entertainment, though, performing in every single medium as it emerged, from music halls to radio to television and films. Churchill's Minstrels in Llandudno put him on stage by 1907 when he was just 12 years old. And that marked the beginning of something extraordinary.
Or I'll blab to Mrs. Walker. Well?
Go on, get a glass.
That's better.
The Great War interrupted everything, the way it did for so many young men of his generation. And between 1915 and 1918, Jack served with the Lancashire Fusiliers in France and Belgium, seeing the trenches and the mud and the horror of it all. Those experiences would later inform his portrayal of Albert Tatlock in ways no acting class could ever teach. And when Albert spoke about the First World War, Jack wasn't performing, he was remembering. Performing consumed Jack after the war ended. The very first stage production of Dracula featured him in 1924 with Hamilton Dean's company, which meant he was there at the beginning of one of theatre's most enduring properties.
I'll look in again and see you tomorrow.
Oh, well, it's a pity you haven't got something better to do with your time. And you're old, I shouldn't bother if I were you.
Running his own theatre in Colwyn Bay, North Wales by 1935 showed how far he'd come, and this was a man who lived and breathed the stage every single day. Radio gave Jack his first taste of long-running success, though. 14 years straight from 1946 to 1960 saw him playing Mr. Maggs the gardener in the BBC radio series Mrs. Dale's Diary, and millions of listeners knew his voice intimately. And being one of the very first television performers at Alexandra Palace, when the BBC was still figuring out what this new medium could do, put him at the forefront of broadcasting history. Films came too. Proper British classics like Hobson's Choice in '54, The Man in the White Suit in '51, and The Cure for Love in '49.
Oh, dear.
Look who's talking. And she's shot more than half a bottle herself.
Mrs. Sharple.
Oh,
Granada Television launched a new serial called Coronation Street in December of 1960, and when Jack Howarth joined the cast, he wasn't some unknown quantity. 5 decades of experience sat behind him, and he was also 64 years old, an age when most people start thinking about slowing down. Jack was just getting started on the role that would define the rest of his life. Episode 1 of Coronation Street aired on the 9th of December, 1960, and Albert Tatlock shuffled onto our screens right from the start. Yet that flat cap on his head and that grumble ready on his lips felt instantly real. And Albert wasn't just a character, he was your granddad, your neighbor, that old boy down the pub who'd fought in the war and never quite let you forget it.
Now, you do as you're told, and you'll be good for plenty more years.
Can I have some jam on the spoon afterwards?
The character came written as a retired town hall clerk, born on the 8th of August, 1895, in Weatherfield. Marriage to his wife Bessie Vickery happened back in 1919, right after the war, and they'd occupied number 1 Coronation Street for 65 years. That kind of detail gave Coronation Street its authenticity because people didn't just pass through, they put down roots and stayed put for generations. Meeting Albert in 1960 meant meeting a recent widower. Bessie had passed away in her sleep not long before, leaving him alone in that house and completely set in his ways. A daughter named Beattie Pearson existed, but their relationship was strained and distant, and that estrangement would become important down the line.
you're getting boiled.
What, on a nip of rum?
Couple of tots more like, and everybody'll think it's on our child.
I don't care.
His real family connection, the one that mattered most to the show, came through his niece, Valerie Tatlock. Valerie married Ken Barlow in 1962, and suddenly Albert had a proper connection to one of the show's central characters. Blood didn't link Ken and Albert, but the nephew-by-marriage relationship grew into something that would last over 2 decades. That tragic electrical accident took Valerie in '71, and Ken moved into number 1 to care for Albert, which was beautiful storytelling showing how families form through love and necessity rather than just blood ties. British television found its archetypal grumpy old man in Albert Tatlock almost immediately. Now crusty and opinionated and utterly set in his ways, he'd spend evenings in the snug of the Rover's Return, nursing a pint and sharing war stories whether anyone wanted to hear them or not.
The usual.
The usual?
That's what I said.
Well, what is the usual, Mr.
Albert Tatlock.
His allotment kept him busy, along with collecting coins, and he took a certain pride in being difficult. Underneath all that grumpiness sat a good heart, though, and Albert cared deeply about his street, his community, and the people around him, even if he'd rather bite his tongue off than say it out loud. The character became such an icon that Albert Tatlock actually entered the British lexicon as a phrase. Someone calling you an Albert Tatlock meant you were being a grumpy old git, and honestly, something almost affectionate lived in that insult. The Skids released a song in '79 called TV Stars, with a chant of Albert Tatlock, un Albert Tatlock, and that's the kind of proper cultural impact most actors never achieve. By the mid-60s, Albert caught the eye of Clara Midgley, not long after he'd retired from the town hall. Marriage proposals came from her, which Albert declined by stating he was too set in his ways, and that was the character through and through. The writers weren't finished with his love life, though, and in '69, they crafted what remains one of the most memorable storylines in the show's history. Marriage to Alice Pickens, played by Doris Hare, was supposed to happen, with guests assembled and the church ready, but the vicar was delayed. Alice took the delay as a bad sign and called off the entire wedding right there in front of everyone. Poor Albert got jilted at the altar. More attempted romance and some genuinely touching moments filled the 70s. Proposing to Minnie Caldwell in 73 wasn't about love for Albert, it was about finances, a practical arrangement between two old friends. Ina Sharples broke off the engagement, though, being the voice of harsh reality and pointing out they'd actually earn less money as a married couple. The truth hurts sometimes. His 80th birthday arrived in August of 75, and the residents of Coronation Street threw him a proper surprise party. His old regiment even sent a bugler, and which was one of those moments reminding viewers that Albert wasn't just a grumpy old man, he was a veteran and a survivor, someone who'd served his country and carried those memories every single day. Getting locked in the Rover's cellar overnight with Stan Ogden in 76 could have been pure comedy. What actually happened became something more poignant as the two men, one from the First World War and one from the Second, shared their experiences with each other. Beautiful writing created that scene, the kind that reminded everyone why Coronation Street had become appointment television for millions. Albert's storylines began focusing more on his relationship with Ken and his place in a rapidly changing world as the 80s arrived. And something happened in 1980 that broke hearts across the nation when Albert sold his military medal to fund a trip to London for Remembrance Day. Honoring a fallen comrade named Monty Shawcross mattered to him, and the medal was the only thing of value he had left. Ken discovered what had happened and quietly bought the medal back, returning it to Albert with no fuss and no grand gesture, just one man looking after another. Coronation Street at its absolute finest. Marriage to Deirdre Langton came for Ken in 81, and Albert gave up his bedroom so the newlyweds could have it, moving himself into the front parlor without complaint. Young Tracy got welcomed into the family as his step-granddaughter, another generation under the roof at number 1. Or a decision Albert made by July of 83 would cause significant family drama later on when he sold number 1 Coronation Street to Ken for 10,000 quid. Discovering the sale sent his daughter Beatty into a fury because she'd been expecting to inherit the house, and suddenly it was gone. Jack Howarth and Albert Tatlock had become virtually inseparable in the public mind throughout all these years. Producer Bill Podmore once said that Jack's colorful character blended in so well with Albert Tatlock's that it would take an expert to spot the difference, noting that only Albert's false mustache told them apart. That's the mark of truly great performance work, when the lines between actor and character blur so completely they're essentially the same person. Time catches up with everyone, though, even legends, and late 1983 made it increasingly clear that Jack was struggling at 87 years old after working almost continuously for over 70 years. His health was beginning to fail, and difficulty with his speech required adjustments from the production team, sometimes having other characters repeat Albert's lines so the audience could follow along. None of it was ideal, but everyone involved wanted to make it work because the show simply couldn't imagine Coronation Street without Albert Tatlock. Jack filmed what would be his final recording session in December of 83. His last on-screen appearance aired on either the 23rd or 25th of January 1984, with sources differing slightly on the exact date, but late January regardless. The storyline was simple and left the door completely open because Albert went to stay with his daughter Beatty, and it was meant to be temporary, a visit and nothing more. He'd be back. What happened next becomes absolutely crucial to understand. Granada Television made it explicitly clear when newspapers started speculating that Jack Howarth had not been written out. His health required a temporary absence, but filming was scheduled to resume at the end of April '84. Retirement wasn't happening, and this wasn't a gentle exit. This was an old man taking a break so he could come back stronger. The Manchester Evening News spoke to his wife Betty in February of '84, just weeks before Jack's death. All her words were crystal clear when she said Jack had no intention of resigning and would stay in Coronation Street for as long as Granada wanted him. Those weren't the words of a man preparing to leave. Those were the words of someone who fully intended to return to work. Llandudno, Wales became where Jack spent those early months of 1984, the same place where he'd started his performing career as a 12-year-old lad with Churchill's Minstrels 77 years earlier. Something poetic lives in that coincidence, even if the poetry breaks your heart. Llandudno General Hospital was where Jack Howarth died on the 31st of March, 1984, with kidney failure and pneumonia taking him at 88 years old. His wife Betty and his son John were at his bedside. The cast, the crew, and millions of viewers who'd grown up with Albert Tatlock were devastated by the news. This wasn't how it was supposed to end, and producer Mervyn Watson spoke to the press about how Jack had likely been the oldest working actor in England at the time. Researchers had asked him at 86 about when he intended to retire, and Jack had reportedly said he was too old to retire. He'd also mentioned once that he would never have joined Coronation Street had he known it would run so long, but affection lived in that statement rather than regret. January of '83 saw Jack awarded an MBE just months before his death. The honor wasn't for his acting, though, which is important to understand because it recognized his extraordinary charity work supporting disabled people and children with learning difficulties. A life vice president of the Stars Organization for Spastics, now known as Scope, was a title he held proudly, and he'd raised more than £50,000 through autograph donations alone, typically charging 10 to 20 pence each. Giving back consumed him even in his final years. Colwyn Bay Crematorium held his funeral on the 6th of April, 1984. The private cremation was conducted by Reverend David Jenkins, the vicar of Llanros, and comedian Wyn Calvin, who served as chairman of the Welsh Committee for the Variety Club of Great Britain, gave the address. "Abide with me" was the hymn they sang. £60,000 went to his wife Betty in his will, and £250 went to Scope, the charity he'd supported so passionately. A memorial service took place 2 months later, on the 19th of June, at St. Paul's Church in Covent Garden, known as the Actors' Church. The Coronation Street cast attended, with William Roach, who'd played Ken Barlow, among them, and other entertainment figures like Leslie Crowther, Dickie Henderson, Jeff Love, and David Jacobs paid their respects. A proper send-off for a man who'd given 76 years to the profession he loved. Albert Tatlock needed writing out, though. How do you handle a character who was never supposed to leave? The decision came quickly. An episode aired on the 14th of May, 1984, approximately 6 weeks after Jack's death, revealing Albert's fate. A heart attack took him while sitting in his chair at 11 in the morning, happening at Beatty's home, off-screen, and just as he'd gone there in real life for what was supposed to be a temporary stay. The character was 88 years old, the same age as Jack. Beatty came to number 1 personally to tell Ken and Deirdre, and there was no funeral shown. Just the family's grief conveyed through dialogue and the weight of absence. Coronation Street and its respect for history shows itself in something beautiful, though. Albert Tatlock never truly left #1 because to this very day, 2 photographs of Albert remain in the house. One from his 80th birthday party back in '75, and another from '62 when he worked as a lollipop man hang on the walls, a constant reminder that Albert Tatlock lived in that house for 65 years and his memory isn't going anywhere. And references to Albert have been woven into the fabric of the show's ongoing history over the decades since his death. Ken gave his newborn son the middle name Albert in '95, creating Daniel Albert Osborne, a new generation carrying the name forward. Emily Bishop mentioned the following year that Albert would have been 100 years old if he was still alive. Archive footage from that very first episode in 1960 appeared in Ken's Millennium flashback, showing Albert shuffling onto our screens for the first time. Ken commented in 2008 that his mother-in-law Blanche Hunt was becoming like Albert every day, and honestly, that's about the highest compliment you could give to a professional grumbler. Contemplating leaving Deirdre a year later made Ken turn Albert's photograph face down, unable to meet the old boy's eyes, even in a picture, because the guilt was too much. The most touching tribute came in 2019, though. Daniel Osborne and his wife Sinead had a baby and named him Bertie after Albert. Digital Spy described it as a touching gesture to the past, and they were absolutely right. 4 generations removed, and Albert Tatlock's name was still being passed down, which is legacy and immortality of the kind that actually matters. Tracy Barlow mentioned Albert in conversation with Tommy Orpington, even in 2024, 40 years after Jack's death. He's still part of the show's living memory, still present in the stories, even though the man who played him has been gone for 4 decades. A genuine turning point in Coronation Street's history came with Jack Howarth's death, and only a handful of original characters had remained with the show for over 2 decades, and along with Ina Sharples, Elsie Tanner, Annie Walker, and Ken Barlow, Albert had been there from the very beginning, a foundation upon which everything else was built. William Roach became the sole remaining original cast member after Jack died, a position he holds to this very day over 65 years later. Something essential to Coronation Street's identity lived in Albert Tatlock. Living memory of the First World War existed in him, a direct link to a generation that was rapidly disappearing. Working-class pensioner struggles, traditional values, and a certain bloody-mindedness that felt authentically British all came embodied in one character. And when he spoke about the trenches, about lost friends, about a world that no longer existed, and it resonated because Jack Howarth had lived it. That authenticity couldn't be faked. What makes Jack Howarth's story so remarkable isn't just the length of his career or the impact of his most famous role. 88 years old, after 76 years in the business, and he was still showing up, still doing the work, still committed to his craft. Retirement didn't interest him, and when researchers asked him about it at 86, he said he was too old to retire. Most people retire because they're getting old, but Jack figured he was too old to stop. Keeping going was exactly what he would have done if his body had allowed it. That's both the tragedy and the inspiration of it all, that Jack Howarth didn't leave Coronation Street. Death took him from it. Coming back was the plan. His wife said so. Granada said so. And the storyline was written to allow for his return. Time just ran out. A quote from his "This Is Your Life" appearance back in November of '74 captures Jack's spirit perfectly. Eamon Andrews surprised him on set and announced he was taking Jack to London for the show, and Jack's response was, "Oh no, you're not, you know." Even faced with national television and a celebration of his life's work, Jack was stubborn, resistant, utterly himself, and that was the man, as much as it was Albert Tatlock. Albert Tatlock never returned to Coronation Street because Jack Howarth never got the chance to bring him back. It's as simple and as heartbreaking as that. No falling out happened, no creative decision got made, no planned exit existed. Just an 88-year-old man who'd given everything to his profession for over 7 decades, who wanted nothing more than to keep going, and whose body finally said enough. Legacy isn't just about how long you live, or even how long you work, though. What you leave behind tells the real story, and Jack left behind a character so vivid, so fully realized, that he's still part of Coronation Street 40 years later. A standard of professionalism and dedication that inspired everyone who worked with him lives on, along with 76 years of performances across every medium imaginable. Photographs of Albert Tatlock still hang in number 1 Coronation Street. His name still gets spoken on the cobbles, and his legacy lives on in the DNA of the show itself. Somewhere, you'd like to think, there's an old soldier sitting in a snug somewhere beyond, nursing a pint and boring everyone with war stories. I'm utterly content because he's exactly where he belongs. That's why Albert Tatlock never returned, not because he didn't want to, but because sometimes even legends run out of time.